Greetings, everyone. Today is the 1st of January, 2022. I'm Brach Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
And welcome to a special new YouTube event, Intercontinental Media.
That's right.
Peter, it is so good to see you again.
It is good to see you again.
We have stayed in contact since our stumbling block days. But something had shifted after we ended that venture, didn't it?
It sure did.
And Peter, do you want to tell the story of how we ended up a pair of YouTubers from a podcast for the better part of 6 years, and now we move into the YouTube venture?
Yeah, so we wrapped up Stumbling Block because Stumbling Block was about Lutheranism and about being Lutheran, and particularly about being a part of the ELCA. And being leaders in the ELCA, which neither of us really were anymore. And so we decided to wrap that up. And one of the things that Brach noticed in our last year of recording was we got sidetracked into talking about media a lot, be it movies or books or music or whatever. And so he suggested that we should just do that.
You make it sound like it was so matter of fact that we were going to come back.
I think we both knew we were eventually going to come back in some form or another. We may have come back sooner than we expected, but I think we both knew eventually we like the sound of our own voices.
Somewhere there's a joke in there about clergy liking the sound of their own talking, but I can't find it. Peter, it wasn't just liking the sound of our own voices. I think that would be to sell short.
Yeah, that's probably true.
At the risk of sounding a bit too self-assured, we had a chemistry together on Stumbling Block. That chemistry got interrupted, not because of any conflicts between the two of us. As far as I know, apart from the time you threw a pen at me 6 years ago, I don't think there ever really has been a conflict between the two of us.
Not really.
You're right. There were external circumstances changing. We were both leaving denominational Lutheranism, although I rejoined it in Germany, and that's a complicated story, but we were both leaving ELCA, Lutheranism, and leadership, and all of that. And because of those shifts, that chemistry was gone in a sense, not permanently, but it was not shown felicitously in the format that we once were.
Right.
And I myself can say that some of the best times I had in these last years were doing that show with you.
Aww.
And there was just some real magic there. And so we thought, just now to speak to our hopeful audience, that we still had it. We still can work together in very creative and fun and sometimes absurd ways. But we don't want to be doing public theology. So to lay like a methodological groundwork, if I might use that too big a word, but this is really what I'm talking about. If theology comes into the show, even though we are both theologians, I mean, Peter, you may not be actively engaged in the conversation, but you're still a theologian. Come on.
Thank you.
I know you. I'm still running off trying to be an academic and a pastor and trying to make all that work somehow. We only want to bring theology into this new show where it is represented by the media.
Right.
And that means that this is not Stumbling Block Part 2.
No. This is its own thing.
This is its own thing. And it's not that we want to do Stumbling Block again. And I think, Peter, I love the show The Golden Girls, right?
Yes.
Well, when The Golden Girls wrapped, three of them came back in a sequel. I think it was called Golden Palace. The sequel only lasted a season or two because they were still doing Golden Girls, just in a different form.
Right.
Not that I want to compare us to one of the best sitcoms in history, but we are not trying to do Stumbling Block in a different form. I want to say that right now. If you're looking for a theology podcast, this actually is not the right place to be. Number one, because it's not a podcast, and number two, because it's not about theology.
Right.
So anything you want to add to our prolegomena?
I don't think so. I think you covered it fairly well.
Excellent. I've learned something from almost 3 years in Germany, how to do a prolegomena.
There you go.
So today, Peter, let's see. First, maybe we should say I am the executive director. Peter is the executive producer. Mm-hmm. We have retained our roles from the previous show, and hopefully in the future we will have some guests for certain media. We're still lining all this up. Maybe the one thing I will say, does prolegomena ever really end? Is the other thing we're doing a little bit differently is we are putting more into preparing ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And this will be a challenge for Peter and I think, in a way, because part of our magic, and I do think it was magic, Peter, particularly in those first couple of years of Stumbling Block, was the spontaneity to it. We would put a microphone, plunk a microphone on the table, hit record. We're not doing that. Matter of fact, I keep stacking my papers here. I've got 5 pages of handwritten notes for what we're doing today, and I'm not going to read these verbatim. Don't worry, I won't bore you all with that. But I mean, if you want to see what I what I did, we are preparing this, so we're still going to have fun. We're still hopefully going to laugh. Peter, you're still hopefully going to call me a curmudgeon at least once an episode, right?
Well, I feel like I do feel so as part of the prologue. I do feel like I need to. So we're on video, so you can see our setting now. So you can see the studio that I record in.
Yeah.
So,
and unfortunately, you can't see much of where I am, but that's partly due to the time of day.
So, but that is a working turntable that I use, and that is a working typewriter that I use.
Yes, and this is why you're the producer. Because you see that Peter is clearly set up to produce, and I'm in my apartment in Tübingen, Germany.
Yeah.
What's around me are all my books and, the various things where one lives and works. So Peter is the engine behind this in terms of getting it up and running. I always think the I don't know, it depends on how you view life, but part of me thinks the producer has more fun than the director.
I don't know.
Oh, come on, you like editing.
I do like editing, it's true. It's been a while since I've done video, so I'm a little excited about that.
And I've never been involved in a video project. So everyone, welcome to Intercontinental Media. Mm-hmm. I am thrilled. Peter, I know you're thrilled.
Absolutely.
We were texting each other, mutual thrilledness, if I can use a word that isn't a word. And I say we get this puppy rolling. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right. I want to turn my light on, Peter.
Go for it.
I have another overhead light because it's just too dark in here. So I'll be right back. So we are now ready to get off and running. I just had to flip some lights on in my room here because in Germany, it's late in the day. And so I was looking pretty gloomy. And for doing video, I'm not saying I have to look pretty for video, but if we're doing video, I should at least be able to be seen.
That's right.
So, Peter, I'll let you start and tell our audience what we're doing and
Yeah, so
what our assignment was.
We've both watched the original A Nightmare on Elm Street, the very first one, Wes Craven's classic. And it was really interesting for me watching it. It's not my first time watching it, but it had been a while. A few things that as a person who is educated, who my degree is in mass media, my bachelor's degree is in mass media, and so there are a few things that stick out. First of all, there's the classic trope, and I don't know if this movie, so I don't know my horror timeline very well, but so at the beginning we have these two teenage couples having a sleepover. One of them ends up getting laid, one of them doesn't. And the female who has sex dies, and her boyfriend is blamed for the crime, which the punishment for sex is a classic horror trope.
Since Halloween and from 1978.
I think even before that, I mean, back to the Hays Code.
Oh, really? Okay, because my understanding of the timeline was it was Halloween that at least set that in stone. That, in other words, it's sort of an odd tool for the Christian right and purity culture.
Yeah. Well, so Halloween is probably the first one that's able to show the explicit sexuality, like that makes it very clear that they've had sex. But under the Hays Code, implied sex might be punished.
And was that how was that for you? Not the sex scene where she's murdered, but to begin looking at a horror classic like this. Had you seen Nightmare on Elm Street before?
Yeah, I've seen it before.
Okay.
The going back to the first thing that I noticed in that was it's really interesting because you don't see anything, obviously, because you don't see anything. It was the 70s and you wouldn't see anything in a what is this movie rated? R, PG?
Yeah, R.
And so back then you wouldn't see anything in an R-rated movie. Now you'd probably see some boobs, to be frank. But back then you wouldn't. And but it was very loud.
Oh, the sex scene was very loud.
Yes, was very loud.
Well, that's because
they wanted to make absolutely sure we knew what was going on.
Fist pounding into hand for effect, huh?
Yeah, I mean, so and you know, Johnny Depp's character is downstairs like, oh my god.
Well, you know, this was Johnny Depp's first role.
Yeah, I know.
And to step back from that scene, yes, they're having a sleepover, but the reason why they're having a sleepover is because Tina, the character who ends up getting murdered, has a nightmare about Freddy Krueger.
Right.
And Peter, what is your impression of Freddy Krueger, just in general?
It was visually, he's a very effective villain. Very otherly, very uncanny valley. The burn marks and stuff like that. He's clearly human, but he doesn't look quite human. He's I think to a modern audience, he's not as scary as he probably was to the original audience.
What's interesting is, do you say he's not scary because you've seen it before, or
no? No, because he's a very ineffectual chaser.
But don't you think that's on purpose? Right? I mean, the most the demon can do, even when he kills, is taunt. But he taunts and kills only when the people that he's after give him that power.
Right, but if you compare that to, say, I mean, even a comparable of the era, let's say Jason.
Yeah, Jason is more effective than Freddy. That's true.
Jason is way more effective than Freddy. Right? Like one-on-one, I think I might be able to take Freddy in a fight. Jason, screw me up.
Yeah, but Jason doesn't have the depth of Freddy. Jason is a psychotic killer based on an abusive mother.
Right.
Freddy is evil incarnate. Freddy is a symbol for a much greater question, the struggle between good and evil, God and the devil, if you will. At the risk of being the very thing I said we weren't going to be, which was to talk about theology, I think that's, I think with Craven, it's so clear to me that that is there because he's struggling against his own background as a fundamentalist Baptist. He's trying to work all that out. He wasn't even allowed as a kid to go to the movies.
Oh, wow.
And he has a master's degree, had a master's degree, he died. And I guess, can you still have a degree after you're dead? I suppose. Even death doesn't take your academic degrees away. Your body can rot in the ground, your training remains. He has, this is kind of consoling to me as somebody trying to finish up a doctoral degree.
Right.
You can't even take that away from me when I'm dead. This is very good to know. He had, or has, depending on how you view life, a master's degree in English literature, and he wanted to be a college professor, and actually taught he taught high school for a while, and then I think he either taught at a junior college or a university, I can't remember. And then either had to finish to do a PhD or get out, and he discovered small handheld camera and began entering the film world. And I think he starts with Last House on the Left, and then The Hills Have Eyes, or it's the other way around. Hills have eyes, and The Last House on the Left. I can never remember the order. But by the time he gets to Nightmare on Elm Street, he already had those other two pictures behind him, and then being involved in small things that nobody remembers. But I think he's really struggling with his own fundamentalist background, and that's why with Kruger, I mean, there's all this overtone of religious things. When Freddy is taunting Tina, he taunts Tina when the movie opens, and then he taunts her again in the dream that eventually ends with her being murdered by Freddy, and Tina screams, "Please God," and Freddy shows his glove and he says, "This
is God."
God. Oh, yeah. Classic line. Oh my God.
It's an amazingly well-written movie.
Yeah.
I will 100% give it that. It's an amazingly well-written movie. I just think that it's such a mixed bag visually that it throws me off sometimes.
All right, tell us about that, because I know that was what you wanted to focus on, was cinematography. I wanted to focus on story and do an analysis based on that, and you were primarily interested in cinematography. So
that's what sticks out to me, right? Because of my training, like one of the things that sticks out to me, like it is a very mediocre shot movie.
I mean, part of that is because it was done on such a low budget.
Right. No, but you can use high and low angles and things like that on a low budget. It's there's just not a lot of creativity shown with the cinematography, right? So
Mhm.
normally you use high angles to show power, to show weakness, low angles to show power,
Oh,
a Dutch angle to show that things are slightly off, right? Um, and there's just a lot of opportunities that they could have done in a more extreme way when in reality the whole thing feels like it's shot more from eye level. If
huh.
someone is at the top of a staircase, they're shot from below. If someone is sitting on the ground, they're shot from above.
Uh-huh. And you would prefer it to be more like the angles you were just describing.
Right. So like the whole sequence when she finally turns around and is like, you don't have power over me, I have power over you, da 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 da. It would have been amazing to have, I cannot remember the character's name. The girl who actually beats him in the end.
Nancy.
Nancy, thank you. It would have been great to have Nancy shot low and then Freddie shot high to show the
Is
shift in power dynamic.
is the story instead somehow shot from either Nancy or Freddie's point of view?
It doesn't feel like there's that level of intentionality to it.
Okay. Okay.
It's you know what I mean? It just doesn't feel, because we don't see, so like if when Nancy goes down into the basement, it's shot from the basement up at her. If it were from Nancy's point of view, we would have seen down into the basement over her shoulder.
Now, when she goes into the basement to find, and obviously we are presuming that our audience is familiar with Nightmare on Elm Street, so maybe we can presume that, or maybe in the future when we do more of this, we maybe give a synopsis of the movie first. But for this one, we'll assume that all of you are somehow familiar with Nightmare on Elm Street. When Nancy walks down in the school building as she's following the dead Tina's body calling to her,
Mm-hmm.
that is somehow over her shoulder, is it not?
I don't remember
Because
that sequence in particular. I was thinking about the final dream.
yeah, the final dream, yeah, I think you're right. And then this is probably, I guess my overall question then is, from your saying this is not a, what were the words you used? Not a visually appealing movie. Is that what you said?
Well, it's not, it's, I don't know if it's not visually appealing. It's just not visually interesting,
Okay.
right? With the exception of Freddy himself and some of the special effects surrounding Freddy,
Which took
nothing.
something like, took like something 4 hours a day of makeup for
Oh, I'm
Robert
sure.
Englund.
I'm sure. But nothing particularly interesting is done with the camera work.
Mhm, mhm. Is this for you then, given Wes Craven's background, a movie that looks like an academic trying to make a movie?
I don't know if it looks like an academic trying to make a movie so much as it looks like it's, as I said before, it's a well-written movie.
Mhm,
This and you saying that he had his master's degree in English literature
mhm.
explains a lot. It's a very neutrally shot. It's very much the omniscient, uh, or at least the semi-omniscient narrator shooting the movie.
Mhm. Mhm. But
Um,
but that was
the
why
the
I asked.
camera is not a character in the movie.
Okay, right. And that was why I asked, does the movie look to you like an academic trying to make a movie? In other words, Wes Craven is primarily an intellectual who is trying to tell his story
Yeah,
through the medium of a movie. But at least in this one, he has not done these visual tricks or
Right.
visual.
It looks, yeah, it's not so much it looks like an academic trying to shoot a movie. It looks like a writer
A writer. Okay.
shooting a movie.
I mean, I guess with the master's degree in English literature, to me says academic rather than writer. But I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Because there is a difference between a writer and an academic, but they can blend somehow.
Right. Right. Exactly. So like if you look at Kubrick movies, the camera is a character in a Kubrick movie.
Okay.
Right. The camera has its own perspective. The camera is telling a story.
I think for me, it would be hard for me, but maybe we pick a Kubrick film to look at to test this. But I think it would be hard for me to see the camera as a character, because I'm all about language.
Right.
I'm about language and narrative is what I look at. In other words, I'm text driven. So I think what you're bringing out, for me at least, in Nightmare, is a revelation for me. I've seen Nightmare on Elm Street hundreds of times. The reason I had to take 5 pages of notes, frankly, is because I needed something to ground me because I know this movie so well.
Right.
I'll tell my story as to how I first encountered Nightmare on Elm Street a bit later, but I never thought of Nightmare on Elm Street as in the visual ways that you are suggesting. For me, what makes Nightmare on Elm Street appealing, and when I do mean the first one, and New Nightmare, but maybe we can get to New Nightmare in a second. But for me, in the Nightmare franchise, all you need is 1, 3, and 7. And the reason that you need those are the movies that Craven was involved with, number 1, and number 2, that Heather Langenkamp was in, and Heather Langenkamp is Nancy.
Right.
The others, if you want homoeroticism, watch 2. That's your homoerotic fest. If you want almost absurd comedy that really shouldn't have been made, try Styx. If you want Freddy having an absurd baby, try Part 5. And if you want a really mediocre follow-up to Part 3, try Part 4, which instead of the Dream Warriors, which is Part 3, is then called the Dream Master. But those other films, I mean, the homoeroticism in 2 is interesting, particularly because queer people are so much underrepresented in the horror genre. And it was actually the main character was played by an out gay actor.
Oh, fascinating.
Which is it's very. I think they may have even had a gay director in that film. Yeah, they did. They had a gay director in that film and a gay lead actor. So that is interesting. But for me, what fascinates me about Freddy Krueger is not only that Robert Englund is a classically trained actor, and he is.
Yes, absolutely.
And he's a fabulous, fabulous actor. Not just in Krueger, but in other things. Is Freddy as a symbol? It's the evil. It's the embodied evil that Freddy represents. So my reading of, and this is unfair actually, and this is what I didn't do in my writing up of the notes, but I'm going to do it now. My reading of Nightmare on Elm Street, taking it as a set, taking it, in other words, as a whole, what we have, the canon of Nightmare on Elm Street, and I bracket the TV show because that just should not have been made.
I didn't even know there was one.
There was. It's called Freddy's Nightmares.
Wow.
And they're just trying to make money by that point. But really is to read Nightmare 1 through Nightmare 7, which is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Because there you get what he's talking about in terms of Freddy as a symbol, right? Because have you seen New Nightmare, Peter?
No, the only Nightmare on Elm Street I've seen is the original one.
Okay. Uh, the New Nightmare is a movie within a movie. And
Okay.
it's all Craven was doing the meta stuff before it got cool. And everybody plays themselves. Heather Langenkamp plays herself. Wes Craven plays himself. Robert Englund plays himself. Bob Shea, the then executive producer of New Line, plays himself. John Saxon, who plays Nancy's dad in Nightmare 1 and Nightmare 3, plays himself. It's a really wonderful movie because basically the real Freddy Krueger begins haunting the cast of Nightmare 1. Now, who's missing is Johnny Depp, and that's unfortunate. But in Nightmare 7, I keep calling it Nightmare 7. It's what it was originally called, but it really is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I shouldn't call it Nightmare 7. You really get the meat, the fleshing out of what's going on here. But I think even now, to do it more accurately to the time when Nightmare 1 was made, I think you can even read some of that symbolic stuff into Freddy in Nightmare 1 when you know Wes Craven's own background in English literature. So that's I think this is an existentialist movie. My evidence for that, by the way, is the scene where the class is studying Hamlet, and they're reading from Hamlet in that class. Do you remember that?
I do.
I got that right? It is Hamlet. It's not another Shakespeare play.
I think so.
I'm almost positive it's Hamlet, but somebody obviously correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
And the scenes that they're talking about, or the portion that they're talking about in that class, for me, not only is a shout out to Craven's background in literature, but Hamlet is the first piece, really, I think, of existential writing. 300 years before Sartre, 400 years before Sartre, Being and Nothingness. And those of you who know the theologian and philosopher Paul Tillich, Hamlet was a major influence on Tillich's own existentialism. Why am I bringing Paul Tillich into this? Because Wes Craven is the generation of American shaped by existentialism. And given his own academic background, existentialism was just in the air in those years. It's shifted now. It's now, in terms of philosophy, analytic philosophy is coming out of Britain, and it's the dominant philosophy both in the Anglo-Saxon world at the moment. I have questions about that, by the way, but I'm an existentialist, so of course I would. But for me, Nightmare is a highly existentialist movie.
Yeah, I can see that.
So that's what scares me about Nightmare. It scares me is not, it's what makes it such a masterpiece. Is Craven's understanding of existential symbols, and particularly around the symbol of evil, which is embodied in Krueger. Right. And also the way he blurs dreams and reality. It's like the what is this called? Non-being. The struggle between being and non-being that comes in these nightmares, and Freddy is the representation of non-being.
Yeah. No, I get that.
And so what I'm saying all this not to bore you or bore our audience, but and I hope I'm not, but to say what you're raising, Peter, I completely missed.
Yeah.
Completely.
Well, again, it's because of we come from different backgrounds and different trainings and things like that, right? So there's an interesting this is a total aside, This is like has nothing to do with anything, but it just popped into my head, and I feel compelled to point it out. There's a great moment where Nancy is looking in a mirror, and she says, "Like, oh God, I look like I'm 20."
Yep.
The actress was 20.
Langenkamp was born in 1964. The movie came out in 1984. Yeah, she was probably 19 or 20. That's right.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah, that's a joke.
I just wanted to point that joke out. That's all.
Yeah, that's a great joke. And I don't know if you have access to the audio commentary on the DVD, which was based on the old Laserdisc. There is an audio commentary with Craven, Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, and somebody else who I'm of course forgetting. And Heather Langenkamp just laughs her head off at that point on the comment on the "Oh God, I look 20 years old."
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, that's what do you think of Heather Langenkamp?
I thought
she did a good job?
I think she did a good job. I think the acting overall in the movie was very good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it wasn't distracting. No, like obviously, there's a lot of these people's first roles, right, or early roles anyway. And so there's some interesting acting, but nothing that draws away from the story. Nothing that broke my immersion.
So you found yourself immersed in this world.
I mean, yeah. My immersion was occasionally broken by being like, oh my gosh, that should have been a low angle, or oh my gosh, that should have been a high angle. But
so you as a media person do get distracted by if the camera angle is off for you somehow.
Yeah.
You know what distracts me?
What?
Movies that get historical facts wrong. Oh my God, drives me freaking nuts. And they, oh, I don't think they made the reference in Nightmare One. But have you seen The Omen from 1976?
No, I need to.
All right, well, we're gonna do that. As the director, I'm making that call. We're gonna look at that movie together when we officially go into some more religiously themed movies. Let's hold on that for a while.
Right.
But
right.
In that movie, they keep saying revelations, revelations, revelations. I'm going, oh, you idiots! It's revelation over and over, and I lose my ability to focus on the movie. Or they're quoting something that's supposed to be in the book of Revelation. It's like, oh my God, that's not even in Revelation. Couldn't you have had somebody who knew the Bible working with you before you put the darn thing in there? So that's what distracts me. But I admit I'm oblivious to camera angles. But would you believe, Peter, when I was in high school, this is where it's totally ironic. Get ready. I wanted to be a movie director.
Interesting.
That was my dream job, was to be a movie director.
Yeah.
But I think, I dare say, if I ever had done that, it probably would have looked something like Craven's film.
I believe it. And it's like and you're going, I mean, with a few exceptions, because most directors aren't cinematographers. Right. In a vehicle that is so right, because he wrote it and directed it, right?
Yeah.
So in a vehicle that is so auteur driven, unless that person has a background in film theory, it's going to look like that.
Let me just check that to make sure he did direct. I'm almost positive he directed it. Yeah, he directed it. He wrote it and directed it.
Yeah.
And now why am I so unsure of myself? But I guess I just assumed that No, that's characters. Perhaps I should look at the English version and not the German one. That may help. No, he was both. He was both in that one, and that's partially why 1, 3, and 7 are the ones I think that are best, because it's Craven didn't direct 3, but he was involved in the original script. And then New Line, I think it was New Line, Cinema said this is too elaborate, and so they brought in other people to change the script and all of that. But he's still credited as a writer. And then 7 is his baby.
Right.
And not 7. I've got to stop saying that. It is not Nightmare on Elm Street 7. It is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. In Germany, it's known as Nightmare 7 though, and that's why I'm doing it.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
I recently bought the set, the Freddy Krueger set. I then gave it away, unfortunately, but I did buy it a couple of years ago, and so I got reacquainted with it. But yeah, Craven wrote and directed, and he's certainly not a cinematographer, right? He's an academic and a writer and a storyteller using that vein.
Right.
You know what's coming into my head, honestly? It would be like if Stephen King directed one of the movies based on his books.
Right.
It's not gonna look like the Kubrick film, because King is a writer and he has a degree in English. And King is very academic as well. So I think it would be similar. And so I assume if Stephen King ever did this, you would take similar maybe umbrage at the choices for camera angles.
Probably.
And whereas I would be sitting there going, oh my God, this links to this and this and this and this. Anyway, yeah.
Right. And I would get distracted by the fact that, like, oh my God, they shot Pennywise from a high angle. Why did they shoot Pennywise from a high angle?
I'm getting distracted because why the hell in It Part 2 do they give Pennywise those skateboards when he was supposed to be the spider? The scariest thing about Pennywise is that Pennywise is actually a humongous black widow who's pregnant.
Yeah.
And they made Pennywise just look ridiculous, and that was not true to the character at all. It took the fear away, right? It took the evil away. There's a degree of evil associated with the spider. The spider as a symbol of evil, which may not be fair to spiders that actually are important for the ecosystem, but the notion of the Black Widow in particular, it's taken away when you make him look like a clown with skateboards on his legs, or not skateboards, roller skates on his legs. I mean, that's just not. That's like Freddy Krueger in Part 6, where he goes into the video game. And he becomes the video game character. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And he flies off on a broomstick. He becomes a witch. He flies off on. He does, and he flies off on the broomstick. I mean, that's not Freddy Krueger. I'm sorry, that's not. And I'm so glad that Bob Shea went to Wes Craven and said, "Let's bury the hatchet." They'd had some problems, and will you come back one last time? And he does, and he saves his own. He saves the series, because the series had become just absurd. It's nothing against Robert Englund. Robert Englund always had class, even when he was being a jokester. He always had class. He's a fabulous actor.
Right.
But it's sort of like I was listening to the King Singers and the Swingle Singers. Swingle Singers is a jazz choral group. The King Singers are a choral a cappella group from England, and they were doing sort of popular Christmas music, and it was just awful. And I said, but it's not the problem of the King Singers and the Swingle Singers. They're fabulous, but even fabulous people can't make crap material good.
No,
there's only so much you can do to make what's the word I'm looking for without using a bad word, to make a badly written, unmelodious popular Christmas music sound good. There's only so much you can do. I mean, you got world-class people trying to do it, and well, you're going to fall short. And that's how I would describe Robert Englund in these sequels. You have a world-class actor who's got crap material to work with, and whose studio is reducing the character to a money-making enterprise, which was never what Wes Craven had done. And the series just becomes absurd, absolutely absurd. They should not have been made. They really shouldn't. And I'm so glad that we have New Nightmare, because you can just do 1, 3, 7 and pretend like the rest don't exist. And we call this in theology canon within a canon.
There you go.
And not every portion of that canon has equal hermeneutical value.
Right.
And that's, well, that's my high horse. So you're getting high horse on why did they shoot Nancy from up versus low, and I'm getting high horse because they just ruined Freddy Krueger.
Right. I just wish they shot Nancy at something other than eye level.
What you
just so boring. Just so boring.
But then doesn't it rely on Heather Langenkamp's facial expressions?
You can see facial expressions from above and below, though.
Yeah, but isn't it like she's talking to you, to us, right? The character is right there.
I don't know.
I'm just shooting at grasping at straws. That's the phrase.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just trying to figure out, what I'm trying to figure out what makes you tick, Peter.
The world would like to know.
The world would like to know. What do you think of the ending of the film?
I found it unsatisfying.
So does Wes Craven. But why did you find it unsatisfying?
First off, so the movie builds, right? And I was like, there was a certain point where I was like, how much of this movie is left? Because I was like, I know it's not a long movie. And I was like, there's got to be more movie left than this. Because it builds. Her mom gets dragged down. She falls back asleep. Freddy Krueger comes out, and it's just like everything just resolves, and then weird little it didn't actually resolve thing at the end.
You know the story behind that?
No, but I bet you do.
We picked a movie that I've seen hundreds of times to begin our new show with, and I have been a Wes Craven fan since I was 12 years old. I am at a very unfair advantage here, Peter. Wes Craven did not want that ending. That is Bob Shaye's doing.
Okay.
Because he wanted sequels. Wes Craven did not want sequels. They tried 3 different endings. This was their compromise. And so this ending is, Craven didn't like it, by the way. Just so we're clear, this is not Wes Craven's fault. This is money-making coming into play, because now all of a sudden there's hey, we probably got a hit here, and we want to leave open the possibility of
there's so many better ways to do that, though.
I'm with you, and this was part of, I think, the falling out that happened between Wes Craven and Bob Shaye, which, as I say, was resolved then in the end. I mean, after all, Bob Shaye plays himself in Nightmare 7. Not Nightmare 7, New Nightmare. Oh, and in Nightmare 7, by the way, when you watch it and Heather goes into New Line Studios, it is the actual New Line Studios of that time. They sit in Bob Shaye's office. The receptionist for Bob Shaye plays herself.
That's very cool.
That is how meta level this movie is. Really, we should have done a New Nightmare for our review, because that's the one I love. But I'm being unmethodological here. I even wrote a whole this is my methodology for how I did my watching of the film. I'm not following it here because we're being more spontaneous, but I left out, I tried to bracket all the stuff I knew about New Nightmare and really try to look at this on its own merits. But the ending of the film was part of that sort of controversy between Wes Craven and Bob Shea. But I have a question for the ending of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Let me run this by you. This is what I wrote for the film. I'm just going to read this. Did Freddy actually win? Or rather, is the ending the ongoing struggle between good and evil? Nancy gets what she requests from Krueger, but only on Krueger's terms somehow. In other words, Nancy said, I want my mother and my friends back. I take back every bit of energy I gave you. You're nothing. You're shit. And she turns her back, and then Freddy grows to stab her, and then he dissolves. And then she pulls open the door, and it goes to this ending that we're talking about. So that's why I said Nancy gets what she wants, but only on Krueger's terms somehow. Marge, Nancy's mother, is still taken by him after it seems as they're okay, and Marge says, you know what, baby, I think I'm going to stop drinking. I just don't need it anymore. And so there's like this resolution that Marge isn't going to be an alcoholic. And the kids are ushered away in a Freddy car. I call it a Freddy car because the
top is the sweater pattern. Yeah.
And that was the other compromise, because originally in the end of the movie, or originally in the new ending of the movie, Freddy was driving the car. And this was, Craven said, no, we're not going to do that. And so the sweater came down. I've taken away in Freddy car. The ending, at least, in other words, so I'm trying to say, can we somehow save the ending? The ending at least shows that the struggle against evil is ongoing. The viewer is left wondering what happened to Nancy and the others beyond the Freddy car driving away. And Marge has clearly been recaptured by Freddy because, pulls her into the door. And by the way, how they filmed that was, it was a doll. It was a plastic doll that Robert Englund grabbed and somehow it worked on the first take. And Marge has clearly been recaptured by, I read that. What if the Elm Street kids will somehow survive? And this is where I broke my own premise of only focusing on Nightmare 1 and said in parentheses, particularly in light of Nightmare 3, because Heather Langenkamp comes back in that movie. But Marge's cowardice and alcoholism gets her in the end. So in other words, Freddy still wanted something in this. He was not going. Nancy was powerful enough to take Freddy's power away from him and reclaim her own power. So for her and the other kids, Freddy just pushes them away. I'm done with you. I can't get anything about you. But Marge was always a coward. Marge was a coward because of her own involvement in Freddy Krueger's original burning. And to cope with the trauma, she turns to alcoholism, and the alcoholism sucks her down. And even when she says, baby, I think I'm going to stop drinking, I don't need it anymore. Well, it's a classic line of an alcoholic. How many times have alcoholics said that? Right. And, she's not going to will herself to stop drinking. So now it's a question of free will. She's still going to be an alcoholic, and Freddy represents the incarnate evil of that alcoholism and that trauma actually still getting the upper hold on her, because Marge was always a coward. And Marge even says to Nancy, I don't know if I'm going to find this, unfortunately. Marge says, Nancy, faces things. That's her gift. But sometimes Nancy needs to learn to turn away as well. Marge says that to Nancy right before Nancy goes to fight Kruger in the last scene. So Nancy actually takes those words to heart, but she applies them differently than what Marge is meaning. Marge is in a drunken stupor. She's about to fall asleep. Sometimes you got to turn away to, well, Marge does that by the bottle. That's how Marge turns away. She's never going to stop. She's never going to get the bravery that her own daughter has to face the evil. And that's why Nancy is the lone hero in this movie. And Nancy's father, also named Rod, by the way, one of the people murdered is named Rod, but Nancy's father is too. He's not an alcoholic, but he's in denial. Yeah. He's totally in denial of what it means that he and Marge and possibly even Glenn's parents, Glenn is Nancy's boyfriend. I don't think it's ever made clear, but there's a group trauma going on here that is passed down to the children. And it's the children who are now teenagers that are victims of the group trauma of their parents, and they themselves are now the traumatized ones by Kruger.
Yeah.
Are you with me here?
I'm with you. I'm with you. So here's how I would have ended the movie.
Okay.
Right. And this is very tropey. And I know it's very tropey, but it works. Nancy wakes up. Things seem kind of back to normal. They drive off. And then we get a shot of the glove coming from around the corner of the house or something and just black.
Oh. Why is that tropey?
The like hand reveal is like at the end of a zombie movie, you'll see a hand burst out from the ground or and it might not have been tropey in the 70s, but it would be pretty tropey now.
You keep saying the 70s. Nightmare on Elm Street was came out
the
in
80s. Sorry, I don't know why I keep thinking.
Well, you keep saying the 80s, and I keep saying Nightmare 7 instead of New Nightmare. So you know what?
Yeah.
We're even.
Yeah. So I don't know. It might not have been tropey in the 80s, but that's what I would have done. I just have his hand come from around the corner.
And why do you think they then why do you think they chose the ending they did?
I don't know. I think it is more explicitly a non-happy ending.
What they chose.
Yeah. So in my ending, they win for now. In the actual ending, they have not won at all.
Could it also be that in the ending as we have it, it's sending us back again to the beginning of the movie?
In a way, yeah. That's what I mean. And we haven't won at all. We haven't made any real progress.
So does it make you say, God, I wasted the last 1.5 hours of my life and I'll never get them back? Which, by the way, is how I feel about The Matrix.
It doesn't make me seem that. It just feels cheap. Like it's not like I'm really not going to get the last half. It's like, oh, this movie should have gone on for about 15 or 20 more minutes. I don't want to have my time back. I want a little bit more.
Well, and I think by that point they were so out of money that you weren't going to get any more. I mean,
no, that's fair. Like that happens, right? That's
they were down to not they were down to not paying the crew at points in that shoot. I mean, that was a really they got through. They got the investors. Smart Egg Productions or something. It's a really weird thing. New Line Cinema and Smart Egg Productions or something. I can't remember the name of it.
Right.
but I mean, in the end, what I think would be interesting, and so I kind of like to, I know in movie criticism they talk about headcanon. And I'm a little suspicious of headcanon. I agree with canon within a canon because you're still working with all the material. You're just giving
Yeah.
various material priority over others. But if I were to go with the notion of headcanon, which as again, I say, I'm very skeptical of that. I would end the movie when Freddy goes toward Nancy and dissolves.
That would be another good point to end it. Just black. And we don't know what happens.
Well, and I think that's more what Wes Craven wanted.
Okay.
You know, this other thing is you know, you got to have sequels. I really want to make a reference to the shorter or longer ending of the Gospel of Mark, but I won't. But but there really is a parallel here. I've got to do it. Okay, the Gospel of Mark ends sending you back to the beginning of the thing, and this really is what Nightmare 1 wants to do. It wants to end and send you back again, but you can't do it because the studio executives get in the way with their dumb sequel, and so you're left with this ending that just is unsatisfying somehow, because it's almost like trying to get later material into an earlier text, and the whole thing is just a mess. And so if you're going to save it, you've got to jump in world in a way and speculate. You've got to do in-world speculation, which is what I was trying to do in that thing that I wrote, by the way. I was trying to intentionally do that because I don't know how else you save this ending, frankly.
I don't think you do. I mean, I think you just have to live with an inadequate ending.
I suddenly feel so deflated.
Not everything is perfect.
I don't want everything to be perfect. I want it to be organized.
Ah, well, very few things are that.
Well, thank you, wise sage. But there is something to say. If you talk about a shorter ending and a longer ending, and that would be accurate to speak of that, right? That ending is added on.
Yeah.
You actually can say the ending was tacked on based on later considerations, or in this case, actually more accurately, the possibility of future endeavors. This ending is tacked on to a story that otherwise would have been self-containing and left an ending where you don't actually know how it resolves.
Right.
In a sense, even though I said I want it to be orderly, I'm actually arguing for less order than what we're given. We're actually given too much order when it ends. We're not sent back. We're not sent back to the beginning to live the story over and over and over. We're propelled into a badly tacked on future, which was not supposed to be in the story originally. And that's why Nightmare 1 is the Gospel of Mark, and well, Nightmare 7 is the and not anyway, I give up. The last one is an anti-Gospel of John. I mean, I don't know how else to put it than that. I mean, we may not be doing stumbling block, but I can't stop being a theologian.
No, that's fair.
And that's just sort of how I see this. And I don't know, I guess Nightmare 4 must be the Gospel of Matthew. That was always my least favorite gospel. I mean, I just thought that was way too pious. But anyway, this ending, and when you find out that Craven didn't want it, you know, I'm very as much as when I did my analysis of this, I really did try, except for this last part in parentheses underlined, particularly in light of Nightmare 3. And there was one other place where I did that. And then there was one other place where I referenced Halloween. I just asked if there was it, because Halloween came before it. I really tried to stay in world, right? I really, really tried to force myself to look at this as if I hadn't seen it hundreds of times, and if I don't think that's coming through now because I'm not actually sticking to my notes. My notes are far better than what I'm presenting them as. Believe me, I worked very hard.
Type them up and we can put them on the Facebook page.
Oh, Lord Jesus. I don't want to type all this up. Can we scan pictures of my handwritten notes?
Sure, scan pictures. We'll put it on the Facebook page.
Oh, no. All right. Well, we'll think about that. Would you recommend this movie? Like, if let's say nobody knows of Freddy Krueger, would you recommend this to somebody?
Yeah.
Apart from the bad ending?
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I would say it is a product of its time and budget, but it's still worth watching.
No, what do you mean a product of its time and budget?
Well, just like filmmakers, cinematographers, all these people are much more trying to think of the word. I don't know. I don't know what I mean by that. I just obviously because of the budget limitations, they weren't able to do some of the special effects come across a little. Some of the special effects are amazing. Some of the special effects are a little hokey.
Oh, come on. When Freddy cuts his fingers off, that's just awesome.
Hey, I said some of the special effects are amazing.
Yeah, that was antifreeze.
Yeah. Some of them are a little hokey. The like clearly plastic skeleton mom descending into the bed.
Oh, see, I wasn't. That's another one I didn't even notice because I was doing my existential symbolic stuff that I wasn't even paying attention.
Yeah.
So you can tell that's plastic, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, maybe I'll have to go back and look at it again now. What did you think of the Freddy arms? You know, when the arms extend and he's walking down. I thought they did that very well.
It was okay.
What did you find missing?
There were too many unarticulated joints. It looked like a special effect my buddies and I might have done in film school.
Well, that was probably the only money they had. What I was impressed though was that none of this is done with computers.
Yeah, no, it's all practical effects. With the exception of Freddy disappearing, that's obviously done with some kind of.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Trick.
That's right. That's some editing animation trick. I didn't think of that. That's not bad for 1983.
No, it's not. It's not bad at all for the 80s.
Now, here's an interesting little tidbit for you. If you remember this, there's one point where Nancy is laying in bed watching a movie.
Yeah.
You know what movie that is?
I forget.
It's Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2.
Yes.
And do you know what's also interesting?
What?
In that movie, there is a poster of The Hills Have Eyes. So in Evil Dead 2, Raimi was paying homage to Wes Craven.
Mm-hmm.
So in Nightmare, Craven paid homage to Sam Raimi by having Nancy watch Evil Dead 2.
That's awesome.
Little things.
Yeah. So speaking of other movies, we're going to try and do this every other week. That's our initial goal, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
What are we presenting people with in 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks, we are presenting people with John Carpenter's 1978 masterpiece, Halloween.
Yes.
And the question will be, although we really should have maybe began with Halloween for chronology, but oh well. I'm not a historian, so I just play one on TV occasionally. The question will be, are there similarities between Laurie Strode's character and Nancy Thompson?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly because both of these movies are to take place in the Midwest. Neither one of them was filmed in the Midwest, by the way. They're actually filmed somehow in relative geographical closeness to one another. That they're both to take place in the Midwest. And just certain things about the girl next door trope that Nancy has, that Laurie Strode has. I still think that it is Halloween that at least solidifies this notion of the virgin hero, the one who is not sexually active in a sort of celibate nun kind of way, is the hero of the movie in the end, and does some of that come through. I mean, to make one last observation of Nightmare on Elm Street, Glenn, Nancy's boyfriend, desires to be sexually active with Nancy. The first time that on multiple occasions, 2-3 times that I can think of.
Yep.
He's murdered by Freddy.
Yep.
Freddy becomes Nancy's spiritual boyfriend.
He even says it, doesn't he? I'm your boyfriend now.
Exactly. And my contention is that not only is it the virgin that wins, but the demon wants to corrupt her somehow, and Glenn is getting in the way.
Yep.
And the others are already corrupted enough, and that's why he's murdering them, right? He murders Tina, he murders Rod, and then he gets Glenn, but he doesn't get Nancy, and he gets Marge because Marge was an alcoholic, and in Nightmare 3, he also gets Nancy's father, if I remember correctly. I'm almost positive he gets Nancy's father. If nothing else, he impersonates Nancy's father, and that's how he kills her. Shoot! I reviewed a spoiler for Nightmare 3, but oh well. So in any case, this trope of the virginal hero, the celibate, virtuous nun, in a sense, is the one who survives and is the one who beats the bad guy.
Yeah.
Are we going? How are we going to see that being solidified in Laurie Strode? And by the way, I've recently watched all the Halloween movies except 3 of them because they were just so stupid I couldn't bear it. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, I think I lasted about 5 minutes. And the Halloween 2 from like 2009 was just so bad I couldn't. I was like, no, this is worse than The Matrix, and that's saying something. And there's one other one that I didn't look at, but I can't remember what it is. But I've looked at all of them, including the 2018 one.
Okay.
So I'm now familiar with the franchise and with Michael Myers. But you just don't get any better than the original, do you, Peter?
No, I don't think so.
So this was our first venture into our new medium. And until next time, I'm Brach Jennings.
I'm Peter Clark.
This is Intercontinental Media.
You're not good enough for Beverly. You're not good enough for anything.